รายการต่อไปนี้เป็นรายการทั่วไปสามารถรับชมได้ทุกวัย
สนับสนุนโดย AIS ใช้ชีวิตได้มากกว่าใหม่ MG3 ชีวิตไหนสไตล์ไหนก็ฟันยกระดับความแรงและทนด้วย FB Premium Go SMF FB แบตเตอรี่ไฟดีไม่มีทรยศนุสา My Ozone คิดให้ชีวิตสมบูรณ์แบบ
การประชุมนานาชาติครั้งที่ 5 ของสมาคมกฎหมายระหว่างประเทศแห่งเอเชียนับเป็นการประชุมเชิงวิชาการด้านกฎหมายระหว่างประเทศที่สำคัญอย่างมากในภูมิภาคเอเชียซึ่งทางสมาคมจัดขึ้นทุก2ปีครั้งในประเทศของผู้ที่ได้รับเลือกตั้งเป็นประธานในช่วง2ปีนั้นซึ่งผลัดเปลี่ยนหมุนเวียนไปตามประเทศต่างๆในเอเชียในครั้งนี้คือประเทศไทยการประชุมครั้งนี้ได้รับเกียรติจากบุคคลสำคัญระดับโลกหลายท่านที่ให้เกียรติกล่าวสุนทรพจน์นำอาทิผู้พิพากษาศาลยุติธรรมระหว่างประเทศได้แก่ท่านผู้พิพากษาฮิซาชิโอวาดะอดีตประธานศาลยุติธรรมระหว่างประเทศซึ่งดำรงตำแหน่งเป็นประธานองค์คณะผู้พิพากษาในคดีปราสาทพระวิหารและท่านผู้พิพากษาซือหันจินสมาชิกในองค์คณะผู้พิพากษาศาลยุติธรรมระหว่างประเทศในปัจจุบันและเป็นสมาชิกในองค์คณะผู้พิพากษาในคดีปราสาทพระวิหารด้วยและยังได้รับเกียรติจากนายชอกัตอาซิสอดีตนายกรัฐมนตรีปากีสถานและนายโฮเซอิซิโดรลิโตคามาโชอดีตรัฐมนตรีคลังของฟิลิปปินส์และศาสตราจารย์ดร.สุรเกียรติเสถียรไทยประธานเอเชียนซิลและอดีตรองนายกรัฐมนตรีและรัฐมนตรีต่างประเทศของไทย
Dr. Surakiat, what is this international conference taking place in Bangkok that has been able to invite this long list of very distinguished personalities in international law, academics, world, and in fact, everybody who has anything to do with international law is here in Bangkok today.
Well, Thailand is the host of the what we call the fifth biennial, which means that we meet every 2 years of the Asian Society of International Law. Today we have the opening session presided over by Her Royal Highness Princess Pacharakitayapa, who also delivered a very substantive keynote speech, not only an opening speech as such. This is a conference where academics, legal academics, practitioners in Asia and beyond would come to exchange views. We have invited all of them to submit academic papers. And we are very happy to learn that there have been over 300 papers submitted. And the regional committee of the Asian Society of International Law decided to accept about 100 of them, covering so many issues of international law, ranging from the general public international law, thinking about international law, international economic law, economic integration like ASEAN, pollution problem, environmental issue, organized crime, peaceful settlement of disputes, intellectual property, you name it. There are 36 sessions. So that's the body of the conference. We decided to have the opening session where we invited lawyers and non-lawyers to give their view and experience to the audience of, say, 600 people. So we have 2 judges of the International Court of Justice. We have ex-policymaker, ex-prime minister. We have businessmen, bankers joining at the opening. We have also representative of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, during the opening session, so that it will resonate well with the theme of international law and the change in political and economic landscape in Asia. So some of us non-lawyers will be talking about the changes in the economic and political landscape. Some of us who has more law background will then say what are the interrelationship between international law and the changes in the international political and economic landscape, which has implication on Asia. We have decided to create one session called Dialogue with Regional Societies. We have invited representatives of all regional societies in the world to be in Thailand, to be in Bangkok. We have president and vice presidents of American Society of International Law, European Society, Latin American Society, and African Society. So tomorrow morning, for example, we will be having this dialogue with regional societies, including myself as president of Asian Society of International Law. We also want to focus on the next generation of lawyers and non-lawyers and to hear their views of what they think of international law, what kind of society they want to live in, what kind of the legal environment they want to live in, to see what is reflected in the thinking of the youth. So they decided to create a youth forum of the Asian Society of International Law. They started their meeting before us because we don't want them to be influenced by our thinking, but we invite all of them from 14 countries to Sitichai.
Around the world?
In Asia.
Asia.
14 countries in Asia. There are about 34, 35 of them from 14 countries, and another 45 of them from Thailand, working together, and they will report to the meeting of the adults at the end of our conference. They will go through the same sub-themes of the conference. So that's what we are doing, and we are very privileged to have Her Royal Highness Princess to come to deliver the keynote speech and to have distinguished speakers for the opening that we are here today, and also representatives of the regional societies in the world.
And thank you for inviting this group of experts. Would like to introduce them so that our audience would know how lucky we are to have this group of people talking to us about issues perhaps that affect all of us in one way or the other.
Well, yes, you're right. We have Judge Hisashi Owada, the former president of the International Court of Justice, and also, of course, now the judge of the International Court of Justice. He's a founding president of Asian Society of International Law. Next is Professor Luis Miguel Hinojosa Martinez, who is the vice president of the European Society of International Law. Next, Professor Lucy Reed, also a practitioner, who is the vice president of the American Society of International Law, the oldest, the best established, I would say, Society of International Law for over 100 years. On my left, on your left, Judge Xue Hanqin, also the judge of the International Court of Justice. Next is our distinguished speaker, former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Shaukat Aziz, former banker before he became a temporary politician, and now back to be what I call internationalist, global citizen.
Yes.
Next, Isidro Lito Camacho, former Secretary of Finance of the Philippines, now as his vice chairman of the Credit Suisse Asia Pacific. So I think we have a good group
So we have
for
judges,
this program as well.
we have judges, we have bankers, and
Professors,
we have practitioners. Judge Owada, international law, this term to an ordinary citizen would be quite confusing.
Yes.
In what way does international law affect the man on the street? If you can tell us briefly, so that we can understand why we should be interested at all in international law.
Well, the easiest answer is to look at the agenda of the 5th biennial conference of the Asian Society of International Law. It covers everything.
Yes.
Which is exactly what international law is about now.
Yes.
Of course, historically, it started as the name international law suggests, as a body of law which regulates the relations between nations. That's international law. But that is its origin, the European origin of the international law. Different societies have different rules of conduct of human beings.
Yes.
Any society, as the group of human beings, has has its own rules to govern society, and that's why society came about. So European international law started originally as a law of Christian nations. It went into law among European nations. It expanded to the law of civilized nations, which goes slightly beyond European geographical scope. Now we are living in an age of globalization. So it is now the question of the law governing the human relations on an entire globe. And that is why it covers everything. Human rights issues, refugee issues, climate change issues, laws of war, laws of armed conflict, but also, more importantly, international terrorism, which threats the life of the human being. So you can think that as long as you live in this global society, everything that you do is being affected by international law or regulated by international law.
And who writes the international law?
Well, it's based on the common consensus of human beings. That's why.
Where do human beings meet to decide this is the international law?
Well, we are creating, not me personally, but we human beings are creating international law. That is why it started with the law of Christian nations, law of civilized nations, and then the global citizens have to participate in this process of normal creation.
So international law can solve all the world's problems?
Well, we try to. I don't mean to say that we solve all the problems, but the purpose of international law is to try to solve problems that exist in society where human beings live.
But of course, the complication is that when one country stands not to benefit from a set of international law, they will say, no, we have nothing to do with it.
That's precisely why Asian Society of International Law is so important. Asia is becoming a very important segment of global community. It has increased its economic power, it has increased its political power, it can influence the events in the world. And therefore, the idea is to try to create universal system of international law which regulates all the human activities while retaining the diversities of different nations, different regions, and so forth. But how you achieve that has to be based on the regional approaches and the universal approaches, and combine both of them.
But in the end, international law must help solve international problems.
International problems in the very broad sense, not just the problems between nations, between sovereign states, but also between. I mean, take for example the economic relations. Economic relations are not conducted between states.
No.
They are conducted between human beings.
Yes.
And therefore, the legal relations between individuals in the economic field also has to be covered by international law.
Pakistan
ช่วงหน้า
has some experience in international terrorism. Can international law prevent terrorism or help reduce the possibility of terrorism affecting us?
สนับสนุนโดย AIS ใช้ชีวิตได้มากกว่า Rockwood เชื่อว่าบรรยากาศของออฟฟิศที่ดีมีผลต่อการดึงศักยภาพที่ซ่อนอยู่ออกมา
The legal relations between individuals in the economic field also has to be covered by international law.
So if we look at the world today, some of the big issues that suddenly poses itself as an issue for international settlement, for example. Terrorism, for example.
Yes, exactly.
Terrorism. How can international law prevent or solve the issue of terrorism that we see today? Pakistan has some experience in international terrorism. Can international law prevent terrorism or help reduce the possibility of terrorism affecting us?
Yeah, first of all, let me say thank you. Let me say that we live in a globalized world. So every facet of activity we do has an international component. As such, when you have laws which cover beyond your borders, that can give you protection, be it trade, be it security, be it investments, be it flow of information, copyrights, a lot of other things. So coming to the security aspect, in today's world, of course, terrorism is a major security threat. We very often look at the end result of terrorism, which is a violent act, but not the root causes. The real solution of terrorism has to be twofold. And the major activity needed going forward is to address the root causes of terrorism. That each state has to, each society has to look at and then provide for what has to be done. Clearly, if terrorists cross borders or take money from outside the borders of their country or go somewhere else to create terrorist acts, then the international laws do affect. Otherwise, it's obviously a domestic issue. So, in this whole context of globalization and international cooperation, exchange of intelligence is key. Now, that is one aspect which we don't talk about too much in detail in public. But if there is a terrorist or a terrorist group which is planning, the headquarters or the planners are in one country, the people who are conducting the act are in the second country, and the country where actually the event has to is taking place is a third country. So you need cooperation of authorities in all these jurisdictions, which means there has to be some relationship between them. There could be an overarching law which helps go after people who have conducted crimes in one country and are taking refuge in another, and so on and so forth. So as the world becomes more global, as we become more interlinked and connectivity is increasing, telecommunications, physical travel, etc., the need for international cooperation and international laws will be even more. So in terms of terrorism and extremism, once we address the root causes, then we have to see how we can work with other countries so that it doesn't spread to other countries, so that a reverse flow of terrorism doesn't happen to a particular country, and getting these people in front of the law and taking action and making sure that then in future, once they are identified, everybody is alerted. Today, computer systems in the world will have an individual who is a threat to society anywhere in the world on the system. So when you cross the border, immediately the red light goes up. And if there are international laws and cooperation and collaboration, you can intercept that. If we don't do this, we will find that the person may cross the border, but then could create even bigger trouble elsewhere. So I think it's a win-win for all sides to cooperate, to have the legal umbrella which covers this, and then have the enforcement to implement the laws. The challenge lies in the enforcement.
Yes.
It's if I may, on terrorism, and maybe I can share the financial aspect of terrorism.
Right.
I think it was alluded to by former Prime Minister Shaukat Aziz. Terrorism necessarily will have to be funded. And I think through international laws, domestic laws, and cooperation among different governments, trying to mitigate the risk of terrorism by attacking the funding, the financing of terrorism through anti-money laundering laws that are now applied in most countries, but also it requiring international cooperation and international protocol. There is the Financial Action Task Force, of course, that's based in Paris, that's promoting standards around anti-money laundering law to be able to combat the risk of terrorism. So international law in that sense is also very useful in addressing one of the aspects that promote terrorism.
Terrorism is a very complicated phenomenon.
Yeah.
But you asked about the role of international law. Actually, there are a series of international conventions addressing terrorist acts. For instance, in the 1970s, we have concluded the conventions addressing terrorist acts against civil aviation. So that's the, and before that, also terrorist acts against diplomatic protect persons, diplomats, head of state. So those acts universally were recognized as crimes, no matter what kind of motive you have. So that's the first stage. Now terrorist acts become more and more complicated. So you still need international law to tackle those issues. But of course, international law is only part of the solution. And now for between states, you have to have exchange of intelligence, judicial assistance in criminal matters, and all these things you need international law arrangements. In other words, either by agreements or by international treaties. So this is very important role for international law to play. So maybe for laymen, people don't understand, but between sovereign states, when you have these joint actions, you have to have legal basis to support.
But sometimes they don't come to solve the problem through international law. You hit me, I hit you back.
No, even if in that aspect, you still have certain legal norms to follow. It's not something you can simply do it, because when you come to actions between states, even if you have the common target that's not state, the cooperation between states, there are still certain rules to follow.
Professor Martinez, something terrible happened in Paris recently, and you are part of the European Society of International Law. What can international law do about this?
International law does a lot of things, and sometimes it's not well known. The international cooperation against terrorism has given a lot of instruments to the states that did not exist before to fight terrorism. There are around 15 conventions issued in the United Nations and that now have reached almost universal ratification against terrorism, as it has been already said. There is a counter-terrorist committee created by the UN Security Council that helps all states to implement legislation against terrorism and to improve their border controls, to improve their measures against false passports and all kind of documents that can help to cross the frontiers. There is technical assistance provided by the United Nations and by other specific international organizations like the FATF. And this has improved a lot, these instruments. So we live in a safer world because of international law. There were many countries in which the financing of terrorism was not a crime. They had legislation against money laundering, but not about financing of terrorism, which is very specific because the money that finances terrorism may be legal money, maybe money that has not been obtained illegally. So unless you commit a terrorist attack, that money was safe and was not able to be, the person that owns the money was not prosecuted for any reason. So the exchange of information is also the most important instrument against terrorism today. And there are legal instruments that facilitate the exchange of information between states. It's a very delicate issue because the states want to keep their sources.
Yes.
When you have sources informing you of terrorist groups, this is a very valuable asset. Sharing information with other states may unveil those sources, and so states are naturally reluctant to share all the information.
Right.
If you provide safeguards so that this information is shared in a way that is pre-established and does not put the sources in danger, that facilitates this change in information, and that will make the states stronger in fighting terrorism. Now, as what regards what has happened in Paris, you see that the police in Europe is quite well coordinated because we have international, we have within the European Union, we have established means of cooperation, Europol, Eurojust. So there are procedures that facilitate and make very quick the exchange of information between judges, the exchange of information between the police of different states. There are even common groups that with police of different member states act together as a single group, investigating attacks, investigating crimes, and that makes possible that the investigation of terrorist attacks can be made efficiently. I know that it's never efficient enough, but efficiently in a space without frontiers, without internal borders, as the European Union is. I mean, there are 25 states, and because there are 3 of them that do not participate in the space of freedom, security, and justice, but that have a common asylum policy, a common immigration policy. They check the external borders together, and they do not check internal borders. Well, now this has been suspended for temporarily, but still, these international instruments work and make our societies safer, and this is thanks to international law.
ติดตามต่อวันพรุ่งนี้
Act might have been prevented but not reported because international law has helped prevent it. It is the role of international law that is not publicized.